time to talk NFL draft once again on the Our Football Network. Cleveland Browns football. That means Fred Greetham is to join us from the Orange and Brown Report. How's it going, Fred?
Hey, it's going well, Greg. Just had another OTA practice down in Berea at the Browns facility and starting to see some of these guys, what they look like and in action. Of course, they had a rookie mini camp, and now we've had two sessions where we've been able to watch practice. So one more to go.
Yeah, we're getting into it. Of course, there'll be a break soon, and then we're all going to be patiently waiting for training camp. But at least we have mini camps, and that's better than nothing. Okay, before we get into the Cleveland draft, including some of the top rookie free agents that were signed following the draft, I have to start the show by getting the latest Baker Mayfield update. So, what's going on with Baker?
Well, not a whole lot. I mean, there was some potential movement during the draft. Um, I think it was the second night of the draft. There was talk that the Browns and Panthers were close to making a deal. Um, it fell apart, my sources tell me, because of the amount of guaranteed money, that the Browns were willing to pay to of the contract.
Okay.
And the Panthers then drafted, I think it was Matt Corral on the next day. So that's about it. There's not been much word what's going on. The Browns have just said, we view him as an asset. We are not in a hurry to make a deal unless it's to the team's advantage. And right now, the last I looked on the over the cap salary, I think after the Njoku deal, they're now number one in salary cap space. They have like 41 million, and that's including Baker Mayfield's $19 million this year. So they'd have a lot more money, obviously if they trade him, but they've maintained he's in the budget and they're not in any hurry, to actually do anything. And I kind of have said this all along when just my input, a lot of national people were saying Baker should show up to the voluntary camps and just make it really awkward where they just release him and just get rid of him. And I don't see that happening. You got to pay the guy 19 million any way you do it, and why not wait until you have a little more leverage? Right now you have no leverage.
Sure.
There's a couple teams that you think would need an upgrade. Seattle and Carolina, are in the forefront, but so far they seem to not be in any hurry. So I don't think the Browns are in any hurry. They might even keep him on the roster and a veteran gets hurt or a starter or whatever, when the season gets going.
Yes.
Or they may keep him on the roster, all year. A lot to me is fluid with the DeShaunWatson situation. And, I wouldn't be surprised anything happens.
Yeah. Some people on the outside have said, well, it's impossible for Baker Mayfield to be on the Browns all season. He'll be too much of a distraction. He's going to end up being immature about pouting on the bench. And do you think that would be the case? If Baker had to play for the Browns and sit on the bench all year, do you think he'd be a distraction?
Well, you know what? I'm one of the few that think that they could do that because he hasn't been around at all. He's not coming to the camps, and so he's not a distraction at all.
Okay.
And yeah, when he gets there, it's going to be a completely different situation if that were to be the case. A lot of people think he'd never set foot in Berea again, and I understand that. But that's why it's all about the Watson deal. The Browns, beginning of the season, the first 4 games look very winnable, even with a backup quarterback. And then it starts getting tougher as, in the back half of the schedule. And let's say the suspension comes down and he's out 8 games, 10 games. Well, you're paying Baker Mayfield $19 million. His stock, in my opinion, is at an all-time low. Okay, whether that's fair or not because he played with the injury, he's still a very good quarterback. And I would say he's better than Jacoby Brissett.
Yeah.
And you would need to go to him and say, look, it's like a divorce. We don't want you, you don't want us, but we have 8 games, we have 10 games. And this is your chance to be the starter and prove us wrong. Show us, go put the chip back on your shoulder and light it up. Let's say, he was 8-2 as a starter, 7-3, and then Watson comes back and they say, and he still has, hey, I want nothing to do. I want out of here. Well, then they can trade him. His value goes way up. He can get his money next year. Because right now, I don't know if he has a starting opportunity if he just gets traded to any team or
Yeah.
signs with another team right now.
Yeah.
So you can pout all you want, but if you want to get paid, are you going to go out there and try to play lousy?
No.
Or are you going to do what you got to do?
Yeah.
And to me, I think it's win-win. He does well. He gets to go and get paid and go somewhere else. And the Browns are still in the hunt. I don't think he would, they would change their mind and say, hey, we're going to stick with him or whatever. But it's just like Tua did when the rumors were that Watson was going to Miami. He just kept his head down and played. And at the end of the year, they said, we're just going to stay with him.
Yep.
And Matt Ryan didn't throw a fit when he heard the Falcons were trying to get Watson, but Mayfield made a big deal and he showed his immaturity about it. And I understand, but you just be a professional. You're getting $19 million.
Yeah.
And either way, so I don't know, maybe I'm out on another planet on that, but depending on the Watson suspension, they could say, if it's 8 games, we're just going with Brissett. If it's 10 games, it's Brissett. But if it's the whole season, why wouldn't you revisit and maybe mend the fence and say, hey, let's get this done?
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. I mean, like you said, we don't know what's going to happen with Watson just yet, but wow, I in a way I find it hard to believe. Maybe again, I'm on the outside that with Baker Mayfield under contract and in uniform, that he would be on the bench with Jacoby Brissett starting. I would find it hard to believe, but
Oh, that's not going to
no.
happen. I'm saying that he'd be the starter if he, the only way he comes back to Cleveland and sets foot is if, like, okay, we have a 10-game suspension. We know that you're the
Got
quarterback
it.
because they were intending on him being the quarterback when Watson turned him down to begin with. And that's really where the guaranteed money came into play.
Okay.
Is they were jilted and they said, let's just go all in. What do we got to lose? Because our quarterback that we thought we were going back to says, I'm done. I want out of here. I don't even want to talk anymore to you. So I think at that time he thought he said, I'll just go to the Colts. But oh wait, the Colts didn't want him.
Yeah.
They got Matt Ryan.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll go to the Saints. Oh wait, the Saints didn't want him. They got Jameis Winston. Then I'll go to the Falcon. Well, Marcus Mariota's who they. So I think he's been humbled, and I think I don't know what his options are at this
Yeah.
point. If this were to happen, and Watson is suspended for the year or whatever it is, I cannot believe that he wouldn't be open to coming back to be the starting quarterback.
Absolutely.
No, I'm not saying they wouldn't. If they decide Brissett's the guy, regardless, then that's what they're deciding to do. But I'm saying if they can't get anything for him in a trade, you got to pay him 19 million. And again, say you put him in and he does lousy, well then you go to Brissett.
Sure. And that would be Brissett's job anyway. So,
Yep.
well, it's going to be interesting. And odds.
That's the.
I was going to say odds uh, or I should say percentages that Baker Mayfield is a Brown week 1.
I'm saying 70%, 80% no.
Oh no. Okay.
I think they're going to try to make a trade. But the caveat is the black cloud hanging over the whole thing is the suspension.
Yes.
Whether it's anything this year, it's all of this year, it's half this year, their 2022 season could be totally torpedoed. Of course, if it's a whole year, but even if it's 8, 10 games, you can't get buried in the standings, or this is a wasted year for
Sure.
them.
And do we have any idea when the Watson decision is going to come about?
Well, I was, Goodell said they were nearing the end, and then when this 23rd, edition happened, nobody knows if that now extends the fact finding or if they already have the facts on that particular case. But um, my I'm hearing that they'd have it wrapped up by June 30th. That's when all the discovery, any information that they don't know could be, they have up until the end of June in order to present any new information. That's what I've heard.
Okay.
So you would think if they haven't made up their mind yet, they may hold out just in case there's something they don't know.
Okay. Let's talk draft. And that's what we have you here for today. And let's start at the top. Martin Emerson, round 3, pick 68, and it was the first of 3 in the third. And Martin Emerson, you would say, well, the Browns, they have a pretty good, if everybody's healthy, defensive backfield. But as we've talked about before, they play a ton of 5 DBs at once. So just one injury, and you have to go to another backup. So you might as well just add, especially in the third round, a talented player who can play corner, he can play safety, he's got good size. So tell me what they like about Martin Emerson.
Well, it did raise a lot of eyebrows in the media room at the time because obviously they traded away their first round pick in the Watson deal. They had the 44th pick overall. A lot of good players there at the top, of the second round. And then it came to them, and they traded down and picked up 3 picks. Yeah, and then when it finally came their turn to pick at 68, they took a cornerback. And they had their top 5 cornerbacks from a season ago returning, and that's counting Greg Newsome, who just, was a rookie and had a great rookie season. And Denzel Ward, they just signed to the highest cornerback extension at the time, $100 million deal. So you had those 2 guys, and then you had Greg Newsome behind him. You had Greedy Williams, and you had Troy Hill, and you had AJ Green, all returning. Well, you took Emerson. We realized it's like pitchers. They said they never have enough. Within 24 hours, then they traded Troy Hill back to the Rams. That kind of shed a little light. And now we've seen they move Greg Newsome into the slot most of the time when there's 3 wide receivers on the field. And I think that's going to be the plan, him to take over for Hill and Greedy Williams to be on the outside. With that said, they really like Emerson's size. He's like 6'2", and he's really long. And Joe Woods talked about him yesterday when we had an interview with him. The defensive coordinator said he's got 33-inch arms or length, and he can really press the wide receivers. I really think they have in mind that maybe he can be the guy on the outside opposite Denzel Ward, maybe long term. And like you said, he might be able to play safety. The biggest stat that I found in looking at him, and they talked about, he played in the SEC, and opponents only threw at him 13% of the time on defensive snaps. So in the SEC, we all know how good the wide receivers are at Alabama, LSU,
Sure.
and all those other schools, and they're only going after him 13% of the time. That kind of tells you, I think, that they respect him and were going other places when they played, you know, Mississippi State. So I think that's what they liked about him. We'll see. I know a lot of people didn't have him ranked very high, and I know our lads had him, at 7.39, and so they like
Yeah.
him,
No, yeah.
flat and
No,
simple.
our lads had him as a third round potential landing spot. So that's exactly where Emerson went. And so you're thinking that, once again, to surmise, that chances are early on he might be playing nickel, but then eventually, maybe next year and on, the idea is for him to play on the outside.
Well, yeah, nobody's really said that. They like to talk
Yeah,
versatility. That Newsome played inside and outside last year. And like I said, he's still starting opposite Ward on the outside. It's just I've been seeing him go inside when a third wide receiver comes out on the field. And and so it looks to me like he's going to be the number one slot. I don't know yet with Emerson. We've only seen him out there in shorts and t-shirts, and they're most of the young guys are lost until they get to training
yeah.
camp. We'll have a better idea. But I think the idea that they traded Troy Hill, I think that they felt that this guy could contribute sooner than later, and it wasn't just a futures pick, because now they have four top cornerbacks from last year, and he could move right into the third, or as high as the third
Yep.
one, depending on the preseason.
Okay. Now, let's talk about their second, third round pick, and that was Alex Wright, the defensive end out of UAB. And of course, they re-signed Clowney, so they're looking for some additional edge rush help. What did they like about Alex Wright?
Well, yeah, they like his raw potential. Obviously, at UAB, um, he has a frame, really big frame, but he's just growing. I think he's at 260 now, and they talked about maybe when he came out of high school, he was not too much over 210 or 220. And Joe Woods yesterday said they think in 3 years when he fills out, he can be like
Wow.
295, and playing and not losing his speed and quickness. So they really like the raw potential. Um, and I think he can be in the rotation this year. The Clowney signing didn't happen until after the draft, and that became a big signing because they lost Tack McKinley, who I think they were planning on long term being here. The only move they made in the free agency was Chase Winovich. They made a trade. They traded Mac Wilson, but he just seemed like he isn't an every down for sure edge rusher opposite Myles Garrett. And so that's where Wright, Winovich were really all you had until the Clowney signing. Now you got two, tremendous edge rushers, and now you have a guy you can develop long term opposite Garrett. They think he can be the guy long term, even though they got him in the third round. So they like him a lot, and he's got a lot of upside. But now he isn't forced to be the guy as a rookie, because you got Jadeveon Clowney, at least for this year.
Now, with all that cap space, how any particular reason why they decided not to bring back McKinley?
Well, McKinley tore his Achilles late in the season against the Raiders on a Thursday night game. And so he's pretty much, I haven't heard much about the medicals, but he was a free agent. He was a 1 year prove it deal that Barry liked a lot. And I think he showed enough. They were going to keep him long term, but he tore
Yeah,
the Achilles. And so you don't even know if he's going to be ready until
true.
November,
Yeah.
December. So you can't really, he hasn't signed with anybody. He's still rehabbing, and so he could be a guy they bring back, but you can't count on him for the
All
season.
right. Then with the third pick in the third round, David Bell, a very productive receiver out of Purdue, who did not have a good combine. Whether it was his 40 time or just about anything that David Bell did at the combine was not good. Um, because there were some people who thought he could have been a late first round, early second round. That's how productive he was at Purdue. But I think he goes where about he should go. And is he now kind of penciled in as the short and or long term replacement for Landry in the slot?
I think so. I think he's going to be given every opportunity to be that guy. They really like him a lot. Kevin Stefanski talked a lot about him. They like his size. They looked more at what he did on the football field, at Purdue. Very productive. I think he was voted the Big Ten wide receiver of the year. And the last I looked, there's some pretty good
Yeah,
receivers from Ohio State that are
that's
in
right.
there. And yeah, I think it's one of those that the combine didn't run as well in the pro day. And they talked about liking his quickness, the 10 yards and being able to get open. He's faster than Jarvis Landry, at this stage of Landry's career. And they think that he can be that slot guy, and can be maybe the long term answer. So I think one of the reasons they didn't go out and sign a second veteran number 2 type receiver, because they think that Donovan Peoples Jones and Anthony Schwartz or David Bell, between them, they'll be able to fill that spot. And if they can't, then they can bring in somebody else. They also think the play of the quarterback will really help make these receivers even look
That's
better.
true, no doubt about it. Okay, now next up with the first pick in the 4th round was Perrian Winfrey, and I think this was one of the best picks, if not the best pick for the Browns of where they got Winfrey. They get him in the 4th. He could have gone as high as 2nd, and I don't think it would have shocked anybody if he was a late 1st round draft pick. That's the kind of talent he demonstrated, especially when the season was over. He gets to the All-Star games. He had a monster Senior Bowl performance. I would have to believe that Cleveland was very happy to land Winfrey in round 4.
Yeah, it's amazing because, based on you guys' ratings, our lad's 8.6, how high he was rated. I thought he was a candidate, and I wrote at 44, with their first
Yeah.
pick in the second
Yes.
round. And then they traded down, when he was still there, and I knew they needed an edge rusher. They need defensive linemen, especially in the interior, because they let both of the starting tackles go, and there's really nothing to replace them much in the offseason. And then they got him in the 4th round. And boy, our interview with him when he was drafted, he looked like a caged animal. He looked like he was walking in the airport profusely sweating. He was wearing a dog shirt and he was
Oh.
barking, and he didn't even know he was being drafted by the Browns. Turns out he barks all the time, but this guy was intense, and he was the talk of the media because he was sweating, and he called Kevin Stefanski a dog in his. They showed the video when they called him to say they were drafting him. He says, "I'm coming to town, dog." And but out on the field, he's learning his way, and yeah, I think he's got a chance to start or be a big contributor, especially on the defensive tackle position, because of his production. And because of that, he spoke about that, is that they had him out of position, he felt, at Oklahoma. And you alluded to that. They turned him loose at the Senior Bowl, and he wreaked havoc, and he was MVP. And the Browns are going to pick up and use him more in that role.
All right. Pick number 5 and this was the second pick in the 4th round, went to our lad's top-rated kicker, Kade York. And anytime, I always say this, anytime a punter or a kicker gets drafted, especially in the 4th or the 5th round, they're targeted to start. That's why they get drafted. And it doesn't guarantee that it's all going to work out. But Kade York was drafted to become the kicker for 2022 and beyond. So, what do they like about Kade York and believe that he can finally answer the kicking question that Cleveland's had for so many years and maybe be their long-term place kicker?
Yeah, talk to Mike Prefer, their special teams coordinator, and they really made a target to upgrade the special teams. But he said, actually, he became very emotional when they made that trade down, from 44, because they picked up those extra
Okay.
picks. And in their planning sessions, Andrew Berry had alluded to the possibility of drafting a kicker in Kade York in the 4th round. Didn't say it for sure was going to happen, but he was excited and he got emotional because he thought there was a chance they could draft him. And then when it got to their pick, he said it was very he wouldn't confirm nor deny that he got emotional, but he really likes this guy. Said from his freshman year, he really was very good, almost perfect after his freshman year, and he's a big time kicker. you can't play at LSU and the SEC 100,000 and have really, I don't think it's much more pressure than you can get, even at the NFL level. And I liked, in our interviews with him, he's cool, calm, collected, big, tall. He doesn't look like a traditional kicker to me. He's like 6'2". But he talked to Phil Dawson, who's a legend around Cleveland. They haven't had a kicker since they let Dawson become a free agent. And he had all these flag, things at the stadium. And York has been down to the stadium at Cleveland, kicking down there already several times. And he just seems like the answer. The AFC North has Justin Tucker, Evan McPherson, and Boswell, and they expect to be in a lot of close games. And last year down the stretch, Chase McLaughlin just missed a lot of kicks that really hurt him. Special teams contributed to 4 losses last year. Not all the kickers, not all the same kicker, but you won one of those games, you would have made the playoffs, even as bad as the season went
Right.
last year. So they targeted and made sure they got York because they actually felt there was another team or two that were thinking of taking
Yeah,
him.
and also you would have to believe that Emerson, as much as he's going to be important to the defensive backfield, is also going to help him out on special teams. So,
Yeah,
all right.
a lot of these guys.
Yep.
Yep, exactly.
Jerome Ford. So, and we talked about the potential of landing a running back at this point in the draft on our preview. And this is exactly what the team did, adding Jerome Ford. I mean, the kid's got big playability. He's had 6 touchdowns over 20 yards plus in his career. Had 19 touchdowns last year, over 1,300 yards rushing for Cincinnati. Of course, Cincinnati ends up in the playoff and the 4-team playoff format. He's got decent enough speed at 4.46, I believe. So this is one of those insurance policies that in the next couple of years they're going to need to have somebody else take over. Like let's just say Kareem Hunt ends up somewhere else.
Yeah, well, you can see this was Andrew Berry's 3rd draft. And now for the first time, you're seeing them draft. They're not needing a guy to draft them. It used to be they're drafting a guy and like counting on the guy to
Yeah.
start as a rookie.
Yeah.
Now, like even Emerson, they were thinking, okay, we can just take the best player available. And, you can take a kicker in the 4th round. I think with Ford, you really have a logjam. I haven't seen this much depth at running back. You got Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt and Dearness Johnson,
Underrated.
who really showed last year. He went for over 500 yards. And then you have Demetric Felton, who you drafted in the 6th round out of UCLA last year, who was used mostly as a wide receiver, and now Ford. There's really not enough room. Those top 3 guys are 14 million. You got Chubb, who signed an extension. Hunt's on the last year of his deal at 6.2 million, and the tender that Johnson would have is 2.4 million. So there's a lot of talk that they won't keep Chubb, Hunt, and Johnson on the roster when the final cuts come down.
Interesting.
But it's hard for me to see them cutting Johnson. I could see them trading Hunt or Johnson if they were blown away with an offer. In other words, somebody, loses, like a J.K. Dobbins last year towards ACL or something like that. That's one of the reasons they didn't cut Johnson last year, because they know he would go and start for somebody else. But I don't know if they'll carry him or whatever. I know they have Super Bowl aspirations. Depends a lot on the Watson suspension, in my opinion. I think that Kareem Hunt is budgeted in, that they're planning on him being on the team this year. I don't think they'd trade him unless they felt like the season was lost. But then it comes down to Felton or Ford. I don't know if both of them can make the team. I don't know if they can keep a 4th running back. So one might be a practice squad guy. I know they like them both. But because you drafted Ford and his potential, he might make the team, and Felton could be a practice squad guy or just cut. But it's a problem that good teams have.
Yes.
They start building up depth, and now you have guys that other teams want, and I think that's why they took Ford, because it's like, here's a guy who went to Alabama, then he goes to Cincinnati. He's a big time, has a chance to be a big time back, and as you said, after next year you might not have Hunt and Johnson because of dollar and cents, and he could come in and be your two back behind Chubb.
And when DeShaunWatson does eventually play, he's going to turn around and he's going to go, "Wow, I can't believe all these running backs I have. I mean, I don't have to throw the ball 40 times a game." So he
And that's why one of the reasons he came to the Browns. He knew they had the best roster, of teams.
Yep.
And anyway,
Okay, now Mike Woods, one of the last three draft picks. This was the one that kind of I had to scratch my head on this one. Wasn't sure where this one came from. He did average about 33 receptions a year for Oklahoma. By the way, the second of three Sooners that the team drafted this season. So did they specifically say, "Yeah, we like this guy because of some sort of role"? Does he fit something that I'm just not seeing?
yeah, I think he was at Arkansas, transferred to Oklahoma, and they talked about his production, and long ball ability. Um, I don't know if they got confused when they passed out the media thing from the Oklahoma. There was a number 8, and then on the because Perrian Winfrey wore number 8, and Woods wore number
Oh,
8. So all I can figure is they said, let's just take number 8, take them both, but um, but yeah, 3 out of 9 of their picks were from Oklahoma. I don't know if they were trolling Baker or what, but all things being said, I think that they obviously are throwing a lot of wide receivers. They drafted Bell, they drafted Woods, and then they signed 3 really interesting, productive college undrafted guys. And so I think they're obviously trying to offset the Amari Cooper, salaries with some younger up and coming, talent. They have Peoples Jones, who is in his 3rd year, 6th-round pick, another one of those things I was talking about with Andrew Berry. And now you got Bell. So they're just in the mix. I just think they feel that Woods, they might get lightning in a bottle again in the 6th round like they did with Peoples Jones.
okay. And then the last two, another Oklahoma kid, Isaiah Thomas. He is he's an edge defender, so they land him in the 7th round, and then they also drafted the center from Texas Tech, Dawson Deaton. And I have to think that Deaton, as well as Petrula, who we'll get to in a minute, who was signed after the draft, got to be very happy. Matter of fact, Petrula, of course, signed, so he was the one controlling where he went. But Deaton had to be real happy to know, wow, I get to go to Cleveland, where they have like the best offensive line coach in football, and that's just going to help elevate my game.
Yeah, I think that Bill Callahan's a selling point for offensive linemen, but Isaiah Thomas, I think it was production. I think he had 8 sacks his last 2 years at Oklahoma. Our lads had him rated pretty high, 5.19 guy. And so I just think value at that point. Like I said, they hadn't signed any defensive ends in free agency. They only had Myles Garrett from last year. They traded for Winovich, but that was really the only guy. Then they signed a couple guys, Weatherly and Rochelle, lower tier free agent defensive ends. But then, drafted Alex Wright and Isaiah Thomas. And I just think that, especially Thomas, they think they can develop him. And so I think that's where that came in. As far as the offensive lineman, Deaton, yet they let J.C. Treader walk as a, for salary cap. He had $11 million. But here's another guy that Andrew Berry drafted the first year, Nick Harris, in the fifth round out of Washington. Very productive, undersized guy at center. And last year he got to start one game for Treader when Treader had COVID against the Packers on Christmas, and he played very well. And they decided we're going to turn it over to Harris this year and save the $11 million. So now you have Harris as the starting center, and he's only started one game in his career there. But they signed a former 2nd round pick Ethan Posick from the Seahawks to kind of compete with Harris. And now you have Deaton to develop, maybe to compete, and maybe ultimately, be a backup guard or center, at on the team now and down the road.
Yeah, and again, it's just because we talked about, obviously. I mean, Wyatt Teller is the biggest one. That is just the latest example of what Callahan can do to an offensive lineman's career. And then I mentioned Petrula because we can kind of talk about now several of those rookie free agents that they signed. And Petrula was actually the most interesting because of the guarantee he received. You're talking about an lineman from Boston College. I mean, you talk about linemen. If you want a really good offensive lineman in college, usually go to Iowa, Wisconsin, or Boston College. That's pretty much three of the top colleges that you want to turn to, where you're going to always, hey, if I pick a lineman from there, chances are he's going to be pretty good. He had a school record 60 consecutive starts, which is, again, considering how many great offensive linemen that school's produced, is pretty impressive. He's versatile. He was a freshman All-American center. Then, and he had never played the position before. Then he played right tackle, right guard, supposedly a very good run blocker, which is what your MO for an offensive lineman at BC. So that was, as we mentioned, that was the one big ticket guaranteed financial addition as far as the rookie free agents the team picked up.
Yeah, I mean the agent, I think somebody let out the Browns paid him like 150,000 guaranteed to sign with them. And that's more of a recent phenomena, that an undrafted rookie free agent, now they're recruiting them and they're paying them bonuses. And like a couple years ago, the Browns did that with a cornerback, AJ Green from Oklahoma State, I think, and they gave him like, I think it was like 40, 50,000. Then he's now probably like number 4, cornerback, and that was the most, at the time the Browns ever paid. Well, then they did it with a defensive tackle last year, and then they, did Petrula this year, and it makes you scratch your head why a guy like that wouldn't have got drafted in the first place with all the production and versatility. But obviously there was teams in the hunt. When you do the financials, I guess even 150,000 guarantee is way less than if you draft them in the 7th round, because they get 800,000 or something like that if they make the team. So that's what they did.
And then there were four other signings that caught my eye. Actually, 3. And then I know when we talked before the show, you added one, which I was intrigued by, but wasn't completely sure. That was Glenn Logan, the defensive tackle out of LSU. So they liked him, and he's somebody that has an outside chance to either make the team or definitely the practice squad.
Well, because of the defensive tackle situation, they had 2 Maliks. Malik McDowell got in a lot of trouble in the offseason, and he's not back. And Malik Jackson was a 1-year, didn't really do. Neither of them really played that well, but right now of the 11 defensive starters, they have 9 returning. The 2 that aren't are the 2 starting defensive tackles. Behind them was Tommy Togiai, a guy they drafted in the 4th round last year, and Jordan Elliott, who was a guy Barry drafted in the 3rd round his first year. And then they signed Taven Bryan, who was a former number 1 pick for the Jaguars. I don't think he's done a whole lot in his career, but Andrew Barry likes those guys when they become available. So you have those 3. They brought back Sheldon Day from last year. And so Joe Woods, the defensive coordinator, mentioned 5 defensive tackles in the mix, and Perrian Winfrey was the 5th one. He didn't mention Glenn Logan, but they paid $60,000 for him to sign as an undrafted free agent. And because it's wide open, I think he has a really good chance, to, make the team or to at least be on the practice team, because they need defensive linemen. And I don't know if Tommy Togiai is going to be the answer or Jordan Elliott. Right now, I think the starters would be Taven Bryan and Jordan Elliott. And they're hoping Winfrey's ready to go. But even if he's the guy, I don't know about the rest
Sure.
of them. So I think it's wide open. I think this Logan, they like something to give him $60,000.
And then two other guys that I just noticed because doing my own research, I know they weren't draftable players, but the cornerback Sean Jolly out of App State. It's very small for the position, only 5'8", 177. But he had a very good year in 2019. He had 5 interceptions, couple of touchdowns. And then last year, first team all conference, even though he missed 5 games with an ankle injury. But, Jolly was playing for one of the top programs in the Sun Belt Conference for many years at App State. And then the other player was also from Sun Belt, Silas Kelly, the Coastal Carolina linebacker, who was first team all conference last year, 40 starts, career 340 tackles, also 10 career sacks. So those are a couple of guys that just stood out. I doubt they make the final roster, but guys maybe to keep an eye on the practice squad and later on down the road.
Well, that's where hopefully it's a non-COVID year, and this is going to allow these guys to have their preseason and training camp. Particularly those undrafted free agents are going to have to make the team on special teams. The Browns roster is as good as I've ever seen it, and so it's almost set. So practice squad is where a lot of these guys are playing for. And, nowadays, I think the practice squad guys make, 10, 12,000 a week, so, that's a pretty viable position. So I think if Jolly, because of the position, you're always looking for cornerbacks, they usually keep 9, 10, 11 guys on the roster, at safety and corner. And the more versatile he can be, and the same thing with Kelly at linebacker. They want guys that can play sideline to sideline. I think I've been seeing and I've been saying that ultimately Joe Woods wants to play like a 4-2-5. And I think his 2 linebackers, if healthy, are JOK and Jacob Phillips, because they can. And when they had the OTAs, I know it's just June, but those 2 have been the 2 linebackers out there. So they don't put a big emphasis on linebackers. They might have 3 in run situations, but for a linebacker to make the team, he's really going to have to be a special teams ace.
And then the only other player I wanted to mention was Isaiah Weston, the wide receiver from Northern Iowa, because he had a draftable grade from our lads. And I think he's about 6'3" with like a 4.39 40. So it's a good combination. Obviously, a developmental prospect coming from FCS level. So a guy maybe to keep an eye on if he does make the practice squad.
Yeah, he caught my eye because of his ranginess. I mean, he is skinny. He's going to have to put on some weight. But in the OTA, I saw him go up with a defender kind of hanging on him, and he caught a ball with one hand and, caught my eye a little bit. I think that definitely with the undrafted guys they signed, and drafting Bell and Woods, they're obviously looking for depth at wide receiver. They don't know what they have in Bell and
true.
Schwartz. And so any of them can really, they moved on from Landry and Rashard Higgins. And so it's pretty much wide open at wide receiver. So I think Weston has as good a chance as any to make the team
and
or make practice squad.
Before I let you go, you mentioned the cap space availability. Any chance that they might be, like you said too, the roster seems pretty set. Any chance that they might be looking to add a veteran before camp?
Well, I think that right now, I mean, at defensive tackle, to me, it's a blatant hole. But Joe Woods seemed to feel that they were going to go with what they had, and they felt that Jordan Elliott was ready, and Brian and Winfrey and these guys, they felt good enough. But I thought Akeem Hicks would be a fit, especially with having some of the money. But they let him go to, I think, Tampa Bay they didn't want to pay $10 million. I have heard some still talk about Ndamukong Suh, but I think these are maybe training camp guys. If they just come to the point, we just don't feel good enough about what we have. They just don't, and this is my opinion, they just don't seem to be too worried about defensive tackle. Last year, they were below average, against the run, but they feel like if they can get after the passer on the outside and shut down with their corners and safeties and defensive backs, You know, they almost want to force teams to run, and that's just what it seems like. I think that they would go get one of them guys before training camp that are available. Whoever's available, I think there was a Bears, another Bear. His name escapes me at the time, but there's a couple. Sheldon Richardson, who used to play for the Browns, is still out there. There always seems to be guys like that out there, and I think they'll probably wait till after this veteran mini camp and then evaluate. Okay, do we need to go sign a guy or not?
Were you thinking about Eddie Goldman?
Eddie Goldman, that's who was on my mind. I thought Akeem Hicks would have been the perfect, 1 year because they have big aspirations. And this could also fall into play with the Watson suspension or what happens, you know, is do we go into the season with a big hole, perceived hole at defensive tackle if Watson's able to play from the get go? I don't know, but right now it seems where they're at. They seem to be content with what they have. Most of us thought they would get a second veteran wide receiver, but they seem to be content with the Schwartz and Bell and Peoples Jones aspect. So anything can happen, but I think the roster is pretty much set. Now it would be dictated by
That's
injuries
right.
or things like
Yeah. All
that.
right. So that means that more likely that when camp starts, the roster is pretty much set. We'll see what happens once once training camp begins, and maybe even a preseason game or two. And if there's injuries, or if they're just all of a sudden not as content with certain positions or certain players, all right, there's more than enough veterans that are probably still going to be out there skipping training camp and skipping a few
Yep.
preseason games that'll be more than happy to sign on the dotted line, with 2 weeks to go before the season begins. So,
Yeah, that's it. And I think the Jadeveon Clowney signing was huge because they feel that he can play tackle too. He did last year and is good against the
yep.
run. And Garrett now can do that too. So they could move them guys in and around. And if the young guys aren't ready to step up and do anything, so they do have more flexibility. And having two Pro Bowl number one overall picks on the outside that did 25 sacks between them, that makes your defensive tackles look a lot better.
Fred, can't wait to talk to you when the preseason, well, just before training camp or preseason, when we preview the regular season for the Cleveland Browns, because, the summer's not even here yet. When does the summer begin? Like,
June
oh,
22nd,
geez. I mean,
officially.
okay, officially, yeah. And then after that, we got about another month before training camp, 6 weeks or so. So anyway, I just can't wait for it to get here in time. Fred, I appreciate your time as always talking Cleveland Browns football with us, and we look forward to talking to you again in the preseason.
All right, Greg, always a pleasure. Thanks for
You
having
got
me.
it.